Good afternoon, everybody. This is Joni Rutter with Research America, and welcome to our Alliance member web meeting. We always want to thank you for being Alliance members and for joining us. There's so many program opportunities these days on the web, but we have found our webinars to really be well attended, and the questions that you ask our speakers are just so terrific and thought-provoking. And today we have two terrific and thought-provoking speakers, both from NCATS. We have Dr. Chris Austin, who's the director of the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, or NCATS, which is at NIH. He leads the center's work to improve the translation of observations in the laboratory, the clinic, and the community, translating those into interventions that reach and benefit patients. And then we're also joined by Dr. Joni Rutter, the Deputy Director of NCATS, and she's responsible for planning, executing, and assessing the center's preclinical and clinical research programs. And she also serves as a key national spokesperson for translational science. Before we open the floor to them, I just want to remind you that with your questions, please put them in the chat box and we will save them to the end. My colleague Terry will read them. If you're on the phone, you can hit *6 when we start the question period. And of course, we ask everyone to keep your lines muted. So Drs. Austin and Rutter, we're looking forward to hearing from you about how you've been using the unique tools at NCATS to advance research related to COVID. So I am now going to shut off my camera and turn it over to you.
Great. Okay, thanks. And it's a real pleasure to be here. Research America is one of our favorite partners, as I know it's probably everybody's favorite partner. And we were just, Jenny and we were just lamenting the loss of the dinner that we all look forward to every year. So this is a 4th second to that dinner. But I was also telling you that NCATS is having a 2-for-1 sale today on webinar speakers. And so you get both Joni and me. And I asked Joni to join me both because the N3C project that she's going to talk about she's one of the chief architects of that program. Joni is a geneticist by training, came to us a couple of years ago from the All of Us research program that I hope all of you know about, where she was the chief architect scientifically of that program. And I also wanted her to get to know you a little better. She's less familiar with the Research America family than I am, so I wanted her to get to know you and vice versa. So we're going to run through really quickly 3 open science initiatives that are advancing understanding and treatment of COVID-19. And all of these have been either developed in the context of COVID-19 or instantiated, that is, made possible by the rather extraordinary circumstances of COVID-19. You know, I think we, like a lot of people, are seeing behaviors that we've always hoped would happen and have been advocates for in the research ecosystem, including collaboration, teamwork, and sharing. We're seeing those behaviors on a level I've never seen in my career, and we're seeing exactly the hoped for outcome, that progress in research is much faster as a result. And so one of the things that we're doing at NCATS is to say, well, gosh, now that if you will, everybody in the research ecosystem is acting like NCATS, how do we get everybody to keep behaving this way so that we can apply those principles to the other 7,000 diseases that affect the human family as COVID eventually recedes, and it will. But we're all aware that cancer, Alzheimer's disease, rare diseases of various sorts are just as urgent. And so what we're learning here, we're hoping we'll be able to really actively apply to all of those other diseases as well. Okay, so let's get going. Joni, I think you're going to do the first one. Next slide.
Great. I'll take it from here. Thank you, Chris. And I'd also like to extend a thank you to Research America and Jenny for hosting us today. It's really a pleasure to be here. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. This is the title of the talk, and I'll talk a little bit about the National COVID Cohort Collaborative. But I want to set the stage, and I realize that you know the background really because we're all living it, but millions of people have been diagnosed with COVID-19, and there's still no standard of care for it. And so this, plus the problem that there are many unknowns around the disease itself and the sense of urgency that comes with it, the problem that we are trying to solve for with this particular initiative is that there is no good way to collect and share the vast amounts of clinical data that are being collected in electronic health records. And those data can be used to help speed research and improve patient care. So that's the problem we're trying to solve. How can we figure out a good and efficient way to collect and share vast amounts of clinical data? And so both of these, the background and the problem here, equal a need for the translational science approaches to this problem. And with the pandemic, with COVID-19, there's really just no time to just do basic research. We need to do basic research, and we need to learn and implement that basic research, translate it into clinical practices that can be used. And we have to do all of that really at the same time. So this sort of approach plays to the strengths of what NCATS brings to the table, where we tackle essentially every problem with scientific and operational principles that we can apply. And so this is really what we do best. And the National COVID Cohort Collaborative is the operational challenge that will enable the scientific discoveries for COVID-19. And what we do here is we're bringing together a collaboration with a variety of researchers across the country, people who are experts in data science, people who are experts in informatics, people who are experts in clinical trials and clinical data and clinical research. And then we're using our own resources in informatics and in clinical trials and patient collection and electronic healthcare records to quickly pivot those resources to fulfilling this need to have a good way to collect and share these types of information. And this is what's going to help us focus on speeding the development of these new treatments for COVID-19 specifically. And so I think with what we're doing here, the major resource that we're taking advantage of is what NCATS has really been known for. We have the flagship program of the Clinical Translational Science Awards, which are 60 different clinical research institutions across the country. And over the last couple of years, our CTSA program has been working with the Clinical Data to Health initiative, and this is also within the CTSA program. The CD2H coordinates a way in which to collect and harmonize the different electronic health records across the country. And what we've done is capitalize on that for COVID-related electronic health record data. And so COVID has really provided a laser focus for making all of this really a reality. And with the 60 CTSA sites, they cover about 250 million lives. And so that's the number of records that are the potential. We're only looking for the COVID-19 specific records for the N3C collaborative, but we expect about a little over 1 million to 2 million records when all told that we can use to actually enable the science that needs to happen here. So please go to the next slide. When I talk about the CTSAs, the depictions on the left, the little houses on the left with the different sort of icons on the right-hand side of them, these are the different kinds of representatives of the hubs across the country that are collecting electronic health records. So these are our data sites that have agreed to contribute their data through a data transfer agreement to NCATS in a repository. And so we take their data that comes in different flavors that are really different data models that are used to collect electronic health record derived information. We bring that into the NCATS repository and we undergo sort of a data cleaning process or a harmonization process so that all of the data can be compared in an apples to apples way. And that really helps us create a centralized resource for then doing collaborative analytics on these data that can really help us inform the key aspects around COVID-19. So go to the next slide, please. So what is N3C then? And with all of the data going into a centralized repository, this is a way for us to securely store the data, and it will collect, again, a vast amount of medical record data from individuals who've been diagnosed with COVID-19 or who have been tested for COVID-19 but were negative. We're also comparing them to people who've been suspected for or tested for MERS or SARS or influenza-like illnesses as well. So we have a good understanding of the similarities and differences between those different types of diseases that would be explored. And by comparing these, it will help our scientists across the country have access to these data and understand how the diseases and actually manifest and unfold, and how we can then develop treatments, basically not only for now during the pandemic, but also for the future as the pandemic unfolds. And so you can imagine that anyone who's been diagnosed with COVID-19 may be living with some health consequences over time. And so this is why we want to really be able to collect the data on COVID-19 and understand what comes along with those data in the health risks, what are the protective factors, what are the risk factors, what are the better outcomes and worse outcomes, depending on the treatments in the real world sort of health care that's happening across the country. Please go to the next slide. So this resource is something that we are building, we're actively building, and it's not yet quite open. We probably have another 2 to 3 weeks before we're able to open it up. But right now, once it is open, it will be open to all who are interested in research and understanding a little bit more about COVID-19, from citizen or community scientists all the way up to academic and clinical researchers who have questions about the data and can uncover a variety of types of analytics. Right now, we have more than 45 institutions across the country who have agreed to transfer their data to this N3C database. And the initial data is now sort of in the repository. We're working on that harmonization process that I showed in that previous slide, and it does take a little bit of time. But right now, we have 45 institutions that have started to come into that process, and we have about 18,000 now that have gone through that process and are now in the database. And so once we get a little bit more of those data under our belt and we have the agreements finalized, we will open this up in another couple of weeks. I wanted to also show just down below a couple of the examples of questions that you might be able to ask and answer through this type of data set. Can we predict who might have severe outcomes if they have COVID-19? Do some therapies work better than others? Why are some people asymptomatic? And what kinds of long-term health consequences will people need to know about? These are just some of the questions that you can imagine would have great impact for doctors or caregivers on the front lines. And insights gleaned from these types of questions could help identify best practices for their patients, or for identifying or creating decision support tools for treating COVID-19, for example, in populations like diabetic populations, or maybe that's going to be very different than, for example, from heart disease populations. So the analytics framework we are building is really key to this effort. And I think N3C is specific for COVID-19, and what we are doing really hasn't been done before. But now that we've built it, and if it works as successfully as we think it will, we can pivot this idea to other diseases and future health crises, and most importantly, really figure out how to bring the power of this new way of open access and collaboration to bear on this and other urgent health needs. So I also just want to take a moment to point out on this slide that there is a link to a web page for NCATS if you want to find out more information or learn about the data transfer agreements. Or watch a video about a tutorial of some of the data that will be in the database or will be accessible. That can be shown here in the link that's provided. And with that, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you to go ahead and talk about the other resources that we have on deck. I should thank, oh, thank you. I didn't realize I had this one in there. I should thank all the people who have really contributed to this effort. It is a team sport. And right now we have over 500 people who have been involved in this effort. This is just a small spattering of them who have really contributed to the major aspects of it. So I want to thank them and thank you. Chris, back to you.
Great. Thanks, Joni. Just a couple of things to emphasize in case you're wondering. You don't have to be associated with a CTSA to be eligible to put data into this. Many of them are, but we have other programs from NIH and elsewhere contributing data. You don't have to be a depositor to use the data. So once the data use agreement is finalized, we hope in the next couple of days, you have to have a good reason to access the data, but you don't have to be a depositor in order to use the data. We don't have time to get into it today, of course, but we have put enormous effort into security and privacy. This is in a ultra secure federal enclave that has really state of the art security. We've also done a lot of work around human subjects issues and HIPAA issues and other things that we could talk about if you're interested, or you could write me or Joni and we could tell you. This is a different model than the federated models like PCORI or ACT. It's complementary to that. So it allows you to ask the kinds of open-ended questions that Joni talked about instead of does A work with B? Does drug A work for condition B? Does this work for COVID? You can ask, tell me all the drugs that the data would suggest might work for COVID, or all of the comorbidities that might increase the likelihood of a patient ending up in the ICU or ending up on a ventilator. You can do machine learning and artificial intelligence approaches with this kind of an approach, which you can't do with a federated approach. So it's really a complementary one, to some of the other platforms that you might have seen. Okay, so next one. And we're going to spend a little bit less time on these next one. So this is in the preclinical space. Next slide. I hope it's not frozen. Okay. This is about how to speed the identification of drugs for COVID-19. So this comes from the preclinical part of NCATS, not the clinical part that Joni just described. And the issue here is just as urgent, and the answer to a degree is just the same. That is generating data and sharing it on a massive scale in as close to real time as possible. So you're all aware, I think, that labs around the world, including our own, are running experiments, drug screens, to look for particular potential treatments for COVID-19, and they've been doing this for months. But results and the methods and the detailed methods generally aren't shared quickly. Even a preprint in bioRxiv takes weeks or months sometimes to get going, and in those they don't have all the data that you need, all the primary data, the metadata, all of that stuff that you really need to be able to compare results across labs across the world, and this of course limits the individual experiment's impact and delays weeding out the individual findings of an individual lab for what people find consistently among labs. So what you see on the right side is what we did early on in the process, and we developed testing systems or assays, high-throughput screening assays, to identify drugs at virtually every stage of the viral life cycle, in addition to doing live viral assays. So each of those stars is a different testing system because we didn't know where the Achilles heel of this virus would be, so we decided to do them all at once. And if you go to the next one, what we decided to do was to create, for the first time, an open data website where we deposited these data in as close to real time as possible. Generally, these data are not shared at all, or if they are, it's often a year after the trials are done, or if they're published, it's only about 1% of the data that are published in a typical publication. And that really limits the ability of researchers to compare data, figure out what, if it worked in one, didn't work in another, why? And so what's the answer to this? Well, the answer is to do what NCATS does best, which is to run experiments in very high throughput. And those of us who know us know that we like to do that. and to run them across every drug ever approved for human use worldwide. It's a collection that we put together about 10 years ago, and we keep updated every year with all the new drugs that are approved. And then to make the data immediately available to the world, and that little asterisk to say this is not natural. I think you all appreciate that that is not normal behavior for scientists. We tend to worry about publications and credit and all that stuff, which is all understandable, but we decided we're not going to do this. This is a pandemic. We're going to make this available immediately, and we're going to challenge the entire world's research community to do the same. So if you go to the next one, we created a website that does this, where new data are uploaded as soon as it's quality controlled. All the screening data, the positives and the negatives, all the compounds, you can sort them, you can view them right on the site, and you don't have to be an expert in bioinformatics. So you could be somebody like me. I'm a physician, for God's sake. So I certainly am not a bioinformatics expert, but I can use a site like this. All the experimental protocols, the detailed protocols are being shared openly on the site too, and you can download everything. And here it is, out the website there that I'd encourage you to go to. So you go to the next one. The future of this, I'll just show you. This is a screenshot of what you can see on the right there. That you can sort this by the target or the kind of assay it is, and then along the top are all the compounds, and you can see whether they worked. Or they increase the activity or decrease the activity or had no effect. And you can look across all the compounds or all the assays in whatever way you want. What we're bringing to it now is some very exciting additional things, which are combination screens. We're all aware that particularly for infectious disease, it's often not one drug that does the trick. It's multiple drugs. And of course, this is most familiar in HIV and TB, but in many cases, this is the case. To put the so-called high content screening, these are the microscopic images that we take off of these cellular assays. So if you're a scientist, you don't have to trust us that this is the answer, this is our interpretation. You can look at it and see whether you agree. And you say, those knuckleheads at NCATS called it wrong. I don't think that is invaluable. And extraordinarily rare. We've collated information also on so-called omics studies, as well as COVID animal models in collaboration with the ACTIVE Initiative. I think you're aware of the ACTIVE Initiative has adopted this platform for a lot of their preclinical work. And perhaps most excitingly, 6 groups from 4 different countries have agreed to share their data in exactly the same way, in exactly the same timing, because they're attracted to this open data model. So we're hoping this is going to be a movement, which when established with COVID, once that genie is out of the bottle, we're hoping that we can put the cork in the bottle before the genie gets back in, even when COVID is over, and these behaviors will hopefully persist. So that's the open data portal. Go have a look at it. Next one, same story, right? How did we do this? A massive collaboration. That's the answer with virtually everything in NCATS. The more diverse the team it is that we have, the more success we have, and the more rapid the progress is. And so was this case as well. Okay, next one. Just a last application that I thought you'd be interested in is a completely different idea, but in this case, it's also related to finding treatments, but also a real think different approach. So this is something called CureID. It's a mobile app that was designed and is designed to capture novel uses of existing drugs in the era of COVID-19. So you go to the next one. So this, okay. So what is this? It's an internet-based data repository that allows healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, other healthcare workers, who anywhere in the world who are seeing a patient with an infectious disease, to add their experience using an approved drug to treat diseases other than that for which they're approved. So in other words, repurposing. And this was developed in a very tight collaboration between us and the Food and Drug Administration, and it allows healthcare workers all over the world to contribute knowledge, explore others' experience globally, and share clinical cases online. And there is, you can do this online with your computer, or you can download the app from the App Store or Google Play. You have to be a certified healthcare professional to enter data and use it, because we really did want to make sure that the data are high quality and based on clinical experience of actual practitioners. And so you can see that what the app looks like there. But if you go to the next one, I think it'll show you. Oh, okay. So here's the current usage statistics. We have over, almost 7,000 users now. And you notice that it spans actually 385 different diseases. We had amazingly good timing, but of course we didn't realize was good timing at the time, to launch this the first week of December last year at a meeting that we and FDA co-sponsored. And 2 weeks after we had this meeting, the first COVID-19 report, a case report, was published. And so we just happened to create this, which is a general need. This is something which is a general need for all diseases, particularly infectious diseases and neglected diseases, but became amazingly pertinent in the COVID era, where we needed to gather as much data as we could for as many different clinicians as possible. So you see all of these different COVID data that are on there. If you go to the next one, you can see what the screenshot of the CureID looks like. If you're interested in treatments for acanthamoeba or acute necrotizing encephalopathy, you can go have a look. But what we're going to look at this time is COVID-19. So if you go to the next one, and you'll see on this site a bunch of compounds or combinations that you might have read about in the literature, including hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin and ivermectin and methylprednisolone. And these are case reports from the field of people reporting their data. Now, these are not randomized controlled clinical trials, of course, but they're case reports, collections of case reports from individuals throughout the world who are seeing these patients. So you go to the next one. Just last week, the Critical Path Institute, who we and FDA brought in as a third collaborator, launched a CureID drug repurposing collaboratory. So they will be adding their heft to adding the ability to collate sites and do analytics on these data. So we're really excited about Critical Path Institute joining in on this, because again, this is an issue that's really top of mind for COVID-19. But the next time there's a pandemic, we're going to have the same issue, and we have this issue now with acanthamoeba or schistosomiasis or any other infectious disease. So if you go to the next one, I think that's the last one. Right. So you know what I'm going to say? Team sport, big team, NCATS, FDA. Notice the partners: CDC, Infectious Disease Society of America, the WHO, DNDI. Again, the more diverse and inclusive our teams are, the more successful they are. So if you are a healthcare practitioner, go have a look on the site and you can contribute data. So we're done. And go to the next slide. I think it gives you our propaganda. There it is. Right. So you can follow us and whatever people do on social media these days. So thank you. Jenny.
Well, I love the tagline: collaborate, innovate, accelerate. Yeah. That's a lot. Well, that was terrific. Wow. It was really great to hear how much you're collaborating, with other agencies in the federal government. I mean, that's just terrific. Yeah. And I think we do have some questions. I'm going to throw the first one out. So in the preclinical space, where you're doing work around data sharing, how much of a challenge is the technical aspect of the data sharing versus sort of the attitudinal or social barriers to sharing data? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's 10% the former, 90% the latter. You know, if you have a good informatics team, which we're blessed to have, the technical problems are the least of our problems. And I think, the technical problems were more severe in the clinical space, given all the human subject protections and things that we had to be concerned with there. But even there, I would say, and I'd be interested in Joni's thought, that I think the majority of the limiting factors were actually people factors. And this is the thing that we're seeing with COVID, and you at Research America know this, a lot of the behaviors that we want people to manifest, that is, they're things that they can do. It's just that they many times decide not to. It's not a can't do it, it's a won't do it. And what we're seeing now is people, because of the risk benefit in COVID, people are changing their assessment of that risk benefit. So they're willing to take risk and, oh my gosh, share data. And what you find is when people get over that hurdle, I find it's like riding a bike. It's really scary, but when you do it once, you decide, wow, this is really cool. And we're able to be so much more productive because, my data is, limited, implication, but if immediately I have 6 other labs in the world and I can compare and share my data with, we can not only make discoveries faster, but we get more publications because the data are more secure.
It's like the classic, it's the classic win-win.
Yeah, it is.
We're at 4:32, but can we have a little bit more of your time?
Sure. Oh yeah, we'll talk about this all afternoon. So ask away.
Terry, do we have any questions?
Yeah, sure. One question that has come in. What has been the reception among the scientific and medical community to the collection of and access to the unpublished data in the Open Data Portal project? Have you seen a shift in attitudes within the scientific community towards open science practices?
Well, it's a little early to tell, but I must say of the only data point I can give you is we follow the literature pretty carefully of people who have labs that have published screens, COVID screens in this case, in the preclinical world. And we wrote them, and of the 7 that we thought were really robust, worth talking to and including their data, 6 of them said yes, and 1 of them said no. So, and that was a surprise to me. I didn't expect that. Now, whether this is specific to COVID, later if we do a repurposing screen for breast cancer, would we get the same response? I don't know, but I'm hoping that that people will realize that by this sharing, they will increase the pie of knowledge. It's not, the pie of knowledge is not fixed. And so rather than arguing about who gets what slice of the pie, which is typically what happens, we completely shift the mindset to say, if we all work together, the pie increases 3-fold in size. So my piece gets bigger. And it's been gratifying to me to see how rapidly accepted that's been. Of course, we've had a lot more people access the site, but that's good. That's fine too.
Terry?
Yeah, sure. Here's actually a good follow-up question. Given the interest in the N3C and Open Data Portal projects, how do you see them expanding moving forward? Might international data be incorporated or other diseases be pursued?
Well, I'll speak to it from the preclinical side, and then ask Joni to do the clinical side. On the preclinical side, 2 of the labs who are going to contribute data are international already. One is in Europe and one's in China, and that's relatively straightforward because, of course, we don't have to worry about human subjects sharing data and all that. So I'm quite sure this is going to go international very rapidly. NCATS has something called Translation Together, which is a preclinical collaboration between ourselves, collaborators in Canada, Europe, Australia, and Japan. And all of those are interested in contributing their data as well. So we're really optimistic about this model. On the clinical side, it's a little more complicated. Now let Joni talk to that.
Yeah, on the clinical side, it is a little bit more complicated. So we probably wouldn't expand in terms of bringing patient information in from other countries. That's not typically allowed. However, we are interested in making the data available and allowing any investigator, international investigators as well, to access the data. And at the same time, the learnings from what people can do, the analytics that I talked about, can be applied internationally, and what we learn also can be verified, confirmed, replicated, or discussed a little bit more in terms of the science of what is learned, and then how that gets applied across different countries that are facing COVID-19 responses.
Yeah, and I might take the opportunity to turn the question around and say, you know, the one group that is not sharing their data, the reason that they gave us was that that the terms of the award under which the work was done didn't allow them to do it. And actually, I didn't believe it, so I made him show me. And in fact, that's true. So all of you who support research, sponsor research or do research yourself, you know, you're buying into this model, literally sometimes, is really critical, and changing hearts and minds, and then changing the freedom that researchers who want to share can.
Indeed.
I'm going to jump in with a question, and I think this would go to Joni because it's really in the clinical space. So how is the N3C program contributing to what we need to learn about the disparate impact of COVID-19 on people of different racial and ethnic groups?
Such a great question, and an important one. With how we're approaching this, the data that come in it is really the key criterion is COVID-19, you know, suspected, tested positive or negative, and so we will be capturing data from all sorts of different populations, racial and ethnic groups, people with diverse environments or backgrounds, rural and urban communities as well. And I think that's an important factor in all of this. We don't know a lot of what we're actually seeing play out, and I think that this is exactly why we need this resource, so that we can start to unpack those questions as to what's affecting certain communities versus others. And then partly too, what I hope can happen from this is also raising awareness of those particular communities that may be harder hit. For a variety of reasons. Maybe they're in an environment where they can't stop working. They're on the front lines, much like the healthcare community as well, and how we can ensure that we're protecting them. And so these are the kinds of questions and data that we need to really help us address that more as a society, and as a research community, to make sure that we're getting that information disseminated as quickly as possible once we learn it.
Yeah, and I just say, you know, it's a really important question, and it's very clear to us that if we had this in place, what's in place now, we're getting reports from these, or we'll be getting reports from these depositors every week. This isn't a one-time thing. It's a recursive, updated, maybe even twice a week is what we're hoping for. And one would be able to look across the experience of all patients in all of these health systems. They're not selected. They're not recruited. There's all patients in all of these. And we would be able to see this in the data. You know, African Americans versus white Americans versus Hispanics. We would be able to see that. Older Americans end up on ventilators faster. You'd see that in the data in almost real time. Just think how revolutionary that will be. I get goosebumps when I think about it. You know, the fact that hydroxychloroquine is being widely used, does it work or not in real world settings? We would be able to answer that question. So the importance of this, it's hard to overstate, I think.
Wow. Well, we're going to wrap up shortly. You've been so generous with your time, but Terry, I think there was another question in the chat box.
Yes. How is NCATS collaborating with industry? Is there an inclination for industry to share CT data at any point, screening data, placebo arm, control arm data, anything along those lines?
Yeah. The answer is yes, and this we're doing this mainly under the aegis of ACTIVE, which I think a lot of you know of. That's the public-private partnership that's being coordinated by the FNIH. But that's another. We've seen the same kind of sharing behavior within the pharma community, driven by organizations like Transcelerate among them, but then also sharing with the public sector. I was actually on a call with Dalbir Gill and a bunch of other folks from Transcelerate yesterday, and a bunch of people from the Gates Foundation working on a data platform where all these data are being shared. And Transcelerate, you may know, or Datacelerate, which is the piece of it, was up until now just sharing control arm data. But in COVID, they've decided we're going to share active arm data as well. And we're going to share it with biomedical research agencies too. So this is really different behavior. And what we're hoping, again, is that, this has to, over time, for this to be sustained, if I could use, I'm going to borrow an industry term, it has to make business sense. There has to be a business reason to keep doing this. If this is a hit to the bottom line, the companies won't keep doing it. So what we're hoping, and neither will academics for that matter, because they have to worry about their next grant. So I'm hoping that a combination of a change in social expectation, and we're seeing this in a lot of areas of our society at the moment, of course, but a change in expectation, which is very powerful at changing behaviors, and an appreciation that this is actually a win-win. As Jenny said, this is good for everybody, because everybody's productivity goes up if you share, and that ultimately makes business sense. Now, you're not going to share everything, of course, but I'm hoping, and this, I know this sounds strange, but it looks like my wish is going to come true. That COVID is going to go on long enough, and I hope you understand what I mean by that, that it will go on long enough that the results of this grand experiment in sharing will become evident, and that the increase in productivity that we are already seeing will become common knowledge. And when that happens, then I think the cork is in the bottle, I think. But pharma, to answer your question, pharma's doing this too. They're all in.
I think that's a great place to end. And I'm assuming you have a scribe, you each have a scribe following you around that's taking all the notes about, how to make this go forward once we get through the pandemic. But no, it's terrific. Thank you both so much, really.
Thank you for having us.
And if there are researchers on the phone who work in industry or in universities or in patient advocacy groups, what's the best way for them to, if they want to figure out if there's a way for them to collaborate, what would be the best point of entry?
There's a bunch. If you, and I hate to do this, but it is the easiest way. You go to our website. There is a contact name on the website for N3C for the Open Data Portal for CureID. If you can't find the right person there, please email me or email Joni. We actually read our email, and we like to hear from people, because remember what I said: the larger and more diverse our teams are, the more successful we are. So you are not bothering us. We want to hear from you. Win-win.
Should I ask you to share your emails right now?
Sure. Yeah,
okay.
You can send them to everybody.
All right. And also, obviously, our Alliance members, you're certainly welcome to reach out to us, and we'll connect you to Dr. Rutter or Dr. Austin. Thank you both.
It's really easy. If you just take our names that you're seeing on the screen there, and you put a dot between each of our first names and last, Joni.Rutter@nih.gov or Christopher.Austin@nih.gov, you're good to go.
You know, that's proof that you do want to be contacted, because we've all seen those kind of scrambled federal email addresses.
Right.
Thank you both so much. Before we end, I just want to remind our Alliance members that our next call is on Monday, July 13th at 1 p.m. And it's with a colleague of our current guest, Dr. Gary Gibbons, who's the director of NHLBI, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute at NIH. So we're looking forward to hearing from Dr. Gibbons. Thank you all. As always, share your suggestions for speakers and other activities for Research America to pursue, and have a great rest of the afternoon.
Thank you.